there's three key questions you should always ask of any Bible verse. And each of those questions is pertaining to a certain key idea. There's context, there's history, and genre. So context is simply, the question you want to ask about context is, what is the author talking about in the surrounding text, right? So if you read a Bible verse, you ask context. What were the verses before and after? Because those verses before and after, whether it be just a few verses or a paragraph or the entire book, those verses will tell you what the general gist is of what the author's talking about. It'll tell you the context. And the reason that's important is because context determines meaning of a smaller unit of text. And so one of the examples I give is I say the word buck, B-U-C-K. Now, if I was to ask you, what do I mean when I say the word buck? You'd probably have a lot of possible answers. It could be buck is a deer, buck is a dollar, right? Buck is the name of a person or the verb to buck. Okay. You don't know what I'm referring to because you don't have any context. So if I add the words, I got a buck. Well, now you've ruled out someone's name, you've ruled out the verb to buck, but you still don't know, is it a dollar or a deer? But now if I say to you, well, while I was hunting, I got a buck and I brought it home in my truck. Well, now you know, based on the context, that the word buck means deer, right? Now, imagine I change the context. I say, hey, do you want that candy bar? I say to my kid, do you want that candy bar? I got a buck, I can buy it for you. Well, now you know the word buck means dollar or some sort of currency, right? So notice the same words, I got a buck, have a completely different meaning based on the context, right? You change the context, it changes the meaning of the word, right? So this is why it's so important that you know what the context is. I would say it's more important than you know the original Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic that you're reading the Bible. Because you could look up a word in the Greek and the dictionary will tell you it could mean this, 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 or that. Okay. But unless you know the context, you don't know which of those possible options it actually is referring to in that sentence. The context determines the meaning. And so when you read just a verse all by itself and don't read the context, now you don't know what the author is talking about. And by the way, that context was Holy Spirit inspired. Okay. So you're ignoring what the Holy Spirit inspired a human author to write. You're ignoring the Holy Spirit's context. So therefore, you might guess as to what the smaller verse means if you've ignored the context, and now you can get the wrong meaning. Worse, and this is what often happens, when you ignore the context of a verse, you might allow your own current life situation to become the new context. And since context determines meaning, your own life situation will change the meaning of a Bible passage. I'll give you an example, Ken. This happened a few years back, but there was a guy who was attracted to one of the worship leaders in the church, and he was considering whether he should ask her out on a date. And so one day he's flipping through the Bible, looking for looking through some verses, hoping to find some sort of a guidance from God as to how we should proceed. And I can't remember the passage. I have it written down somewhere, but he turns to a passage in the epistles and he reads it and he thinks, oh, I hear God now telling me what to do. And the verse said, grace be with you. And guess what the girl's name was? Grace, right? So notice what he did. He interpreted that as God telling him, yes, go ahead and ask her out on a date. But notice what's happened there. The words grace be with you, which I'm sure you can imagine Paul saying that numerous times in the epistles, but grace be with you is a certain passage, right? A certain sentence. It has context, but he's ignored the context. And when you ignore the context, you create a context vacuum. And that vacuum quickly sucks up your own situation, your own life situation. So he's in a situation where he's considering dating a girl. So now dating a girl, this girl named Grace, becomes new context. And since context determines meaning, his own life context changed the meaning of the word grace. from grace bestowed by God to a girl's name. And now you're twisting the words of God for your own purpose and baptizing them with sort of God's like, hey, he's giving like divine approval of what you're thinking, which is horrible. Like you're literally putting words in God's mouth. So anyway, so that's context. Okay. So that's the first question you should ask. What's the author talking about in the surrounding text?